Hello, I'm Clare Southworth, and in this week's Revisited podcast, I'm talking to Elizabeth Walker, and we're talking about the importance of study books. Studies are so important because they help you develop your tone, your finger technique, and articulation, amongst many other things. So have a listen to us talk about our favourite study books for each of these areas, from Moyes to Bearno, Carr Gellert to Robert Wynne, Anderson to Robert Dick, and many more. Hello there, Liz.
Hello, Claire. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you too again. Now, we've had some questions in from listeners about study books, how to choose them, which ones to play depending on levels and all that. I thought I might just ask you at the start is, when I say study books, what comes to mind?
Yes, that's a very good question, isn't it? Because there is, in my mind anyway, a slight difference between those books that are daily exercises, should we say, and those that you can dip into and get some instructions about. And then yet another category, which is, I suppose, the sort of almost pieces to play, such as the Boehm and the Anderson and the Castorade. You know, they're pieces that actually, I call them pieces as much as studies. So yeah, I think there is a big difference between those daily exercise books, which are, I suppose, by dint of explanation, just technique, scale patterns, the methods, if you like, where you might just glean from the pages some pearly word of wisdom, some idea that a player has popped in there, maybe in passing in a sentence, that you just go, yeah, that's what I've been meaning to, say to my students all along, and it's been encapsulated for me in that sentence. And those studies, as I say, that I see as pieces. They're almost extensions, aren't they, to our repertoire?
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. I think there is definitely the need to sort of differentiate between the various books that are on the market, and some are purely technical. So I sort of think of them as the in terms of technique, sort of ones that will be tone development or finger technique development or articulation. And then others are more sequential in nature, and so sequential meaning they're offering patterns, various patterns to work through keys. And then lastly, there are what I call the general study books, which often pick a technique and base the study around that technique, like you're saying, like with Boehm or Alters, whatever. And then there are also workbooks, general maybe workbooks. I suppose some books are also crossover. So we've got a whole mixture. And also then we've got classic and contemporary. It's sort of, there is a lot. So
there's a lot of choice, isn't there, all of a sudden? Yes. And what's interesting me is how many new study books, even this last year, and maybe that's thanks to lockdown. I think we've had maybe quite a lot of teachers who are imparting all of these studies, if you like, in their teaching. Every time I teach, you hope your pupils will get out a pencil and write down something that you're saying. You hope that in every lesson that you give, there's a new idea there. And maybe in this sort of period of lockdown that we've had, it's given us teachers maybe an opportunity to sit and think, well, maybe this needs writing down, because I think also there's a tendency, isn't there? And I often say this to my students, please write it down, because I know you're off to a maths lesson next, or you've just come from a history exam, and their focus isn't necessarily going to be there, so that they take that sentence or that idea or that new technique idea, that it's not necessarily going to resonate in the lesson. And if they haven't written it down, I think, oh no, that's a bit of an missed opportunity. And certainly when I look at my notebooks from college, and thank goodness I wrote them all those years back, those little pointers are still there, and I do look back at them actually, because again, that was a really busy time. I was learning to live in London, and my focus, I'm ashamed to say, wasn't always on what my flute teacher was saying, but I wrote it all down. So Claire, I can look back at it and go, yeah. In some of these new study books, there's little sentences that keep jumping out at me, and I go, yeah, that's like having a lesson with this person, just opening the book and having a little read.
Yes, it's interesting what you said, because of lockdown, I mean, certainly you have written books, and I've written books, and other people have written books, because it's actually given us the space to think and put something down without the pressure of doing other things. So it's a really good positive. So there's a lot of new material out there, isn't there? Which we will come on to later, I'm sure. So
yeah, and you've got time, haven't you, as well, to, I've been buying lots of study books, and you could say, well, Liz, really, haven't you got enough? I mean, I have this pile next door to me. There's hundreds of them. Why am I buying new study books? But, it's fascinating, this sort of little chink that we've had, this little sort of opening, if you like. To not only explore ourselves, but also time to read what other people are saying, because of course, we're all saying the same thing. We all want to play the flute better, but we all say it slightly differently.
Yes, there's lots of little gems wrapped up in all these books. So, and that's presuming, I was going to say, why are then these study books important? Because I know a lot of players will only play pieces, and they don't address the study area. They just think they're going to learn the flute well enough by just playing pieces. So how could you sum up why studies are important?
Well, I really firmly believe that without addressing certain little techniques, and in fact doing that before you play your pieces, you are going to improve the pieces. I mean, of course, I think if you're a really conscientious practicer, you could maybe go straight to the piece, providing you then choose to do your tone exercise within the repertoire, within the material that's in your piece. And yes, you could come across your finger technique that's a little bit wanting, and just go over and over and over that in different creative ways, i.e. creating your own study out of your piece. And that's an important thing that I know I do, I'm sure you do, but actually it takes a time to see your pieces in that way, and to work at them like a study. And I think for our younger generation, for sure, instilling the discipline of looking at the studies, of doing the techniques, the flexibility in the embouchure, the tonality, the expressive quality, and obviously the finger work. It's such a good discipline to actually try and separate those out in your practice, if you like. And for me as a teacher, knowing that my students have covered those patterns, have done some work on their tone, it allows me then to relax and go, okay, when we get to the pieces, we'll tie all that in. And I suppose what I'm saying is, I don't quite think you instill that way of looking at the music as a potential study, if you like, unless you've studied the best, which I would say, looking at obviously Moyes and Tafnel and Gobert, because they are by tradition our go-to studies, aren't they, really?
Absolutely. Now, all that is so useful. And also I'm thinking, suddenly you brought something to mind, that we practice generally in order to play. But if you're only practicing your piece, it doesn't allow you that freedom then to play, because you're thinking always of the technique of it. So what study books do is that I suppose we use them to push our development in all the areas of technique. And each of us needs to pick the studies that will help the progression, but not to stifle it. So we need stimulating progressive studies, but not ones that crush you or demoralize you. And sometimes I think students can get studies that are far too hard for them, so it just puts them right off and they don't keep going. So it's important from a teacher's point of view to grade them for your students so they're not put off at a very early stage. I mean, I've always loved study books. I've loved the whole mix of them. Why don't we talk, if we can separate it out for our listeners, if we talk maybe first about for tone development, what would you pick? You've mentioned Moyes. So what of Moyes would you pick in terms of tone development?
Well, the Moyes is interesting because I realise I actually don't have de la sonorité. Well, I did for many, many years, and I no longer have it. But that doesn't matter because the strength of de la sonorité is that you can memorize. You don't need to look at the book. So I haven't noticed that I haven't got it, but I would say that I teach it every day and I play it every day. When I was really young, I was about 12. I was at the Junior Royal College, and Sir James Galway came and gave a masterclass to the senior students, but that we at the junior college could come along. And he spent 2 hours on de la sonorité, and I can almost remember word for word everything he said, and it was totally eye-opening. And then my mother said rather sweetly, she said, I can't understand how you got into music college because all you ever play is da.
Not the same. Yeah.
It works. It's such an impressive study. So that's my go-to every day with every student, and it's wonderful. Having said that, Claire, I love your book. I love the tips. I love all of the bullet points. The reboot. I love the pages that you put in just to remind you, if you like, of all of those key points, so that you've just got them right in front of you, so that if you've forgotten maybe to take your big breath, or you've forgotten the vocalizing, or you've forgotten an aspect, it's just there as a bullet point. And I find that really helpful with my students.
Thank you.
No, it's really, really fantastic. I have been looking extensively all year with this wonderful book by Philippe Bernard, Le Souffle, Le Son, The Wind, The Sound. He says that it's a selection of exercises and repertoire excerpts to gain control of the air column and develop a beautiful sound. I mean, that says it all in just that sentence, but I find it's been really resonating for me. I love the idea of, he connects it with legato singing. He talks about legato singing, the basis of a singer's vocal and musical expression results from the way the singer connects notes through breathing and breath control, making the sound flow from one pitch to another, and how much more intense the emotional expression is used by the singing of wider intervals. I mean, it's one of those that I read and I think, yep, that's what I've been trying to say all my life. So I've been using this a lot, and harmonics in here are very, very, very nicely laid out. But I love your harmonics. I love that boom that you found and that you play on the harmonics. We've been doing that lots with my students over the year, and that quality of flexibility is what I'm looking for them, because so often I've inherited them and they've gone very far, very fast, and they've cut corners. So many of us do it. We just push into that next octave and they don't have the control of the lips. And once they get that, we've solved so many intonation problems. We've solved so many of the dynamic colors that we're trying to find. They find they can play up in the top octave with different colors and sonorities, which is something that they struggle with a lot, because they've gone really quite fast, very young, and a lot of them have a lot of tension in their lips. So that's something that's very specifically helpful to the sort of students I'm teaching, I guess.
And we mustn't forget his first book, which I adore, Technique d'Embouchure, which is slightly different, because that is really, it's a sequence book, it's patterns, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's wonderful for strengthening the embouchure. I mean, he's picked something that's simple, but so effective, like de la sonorité. Simple but effective. And sometimes the simple things are the best things that we can find.
The things we're going to remember I think a lot of it is almost stopping yourself from reading the notes and allowing your imagination to go. And I think using the word improvisation sometimes scares my students, so I tend not to say that. But, just to be able to put the flute together and to get blowing, not critically, but just get playing, I think solves a lot of the problems that we've got with students going straight to repertoire pieces, because I try and ask them, not to get the music out of their cases until they've had a good long chance to warm up.
You've reminded me of something. We used to have an improvisation test in the auditions at the academy, which was, I just wrote out a lot of semi-briefs, all different notes, changing notes. And we would just ask people to improvise using those notes. And I find that's really good. If you say you're going to start with a tone exercise in terms of lessons, and here are your notes. And I want you to spend as long or as little. And if you want to change the rhythm or anything else, more legato, more articulated, but here are your notes. Don't worry about what to pick. Here they are. But try and make something beautiful out of a series of notes. And it means that their focus is on the sound and the production of the sound and the breathing and the posture. You have time to think when you have space in the tone exercises.
Yeah.
So that's also a good one.
Really important.
Now, other books, I just made a quick list of what I sort of think of when I think about tone development books. So Moyes de la Sonorité, Moyes' Tone Development Through Interpretation. I'm not sure how easy that is to get hold of.
I don't know. I think you can still get it. Mine's ancient. Look, it's awful.
So is mine. There is a modern version of it, which is Peter Lucas Graff. The Singing Flute.
The Singing Flute, and also Robert Wynne. Robert Wynne's done a collection, hasn't he? Yes, his is called Melodies for Developing Tone and Interpretation.
Absolutely, mustn't forget Robert Wynne's books, which are wonderful. Who else have we got? We've got if we're going, I suppose in when we talk about study books, we've got classic and contemporary. So Robert Dick, Tone Development Through Extended Techniques, which is so good for for classical flute playing as much as modern flute playing.
I've got this book, and you know what? I haven't really looked at it yet, which is shocking. But it looks fascinating, and again, using the harmonics as well.
Mm-hmm. And the throat tuning exercises. It's a super book.
Really, really good
book.
Yeah.
So
no, that's a fantastic one, and the little. Is it 24 Little Melodies?
I used to use those for maybe someone who'd only been playing maybe a year, or someone who's been playing for many, many years. I remember a flute course, the international flute course with William Bennis in Kent. And it was when I was a student. And he said, before we get onto repertoire, the beginning, so we had a class of about 16. He said, I want every one of you to play me one of the Moyes 24 Little Melodious Studies. Perfect. And once each of you have played one of those, we'll go on to repertoire. And it was a 10-day course. We spent 9 days on Moyes 24. We didn't get off them.
Yes!
It was just unbelievable. And then, Wibb's famous for his taxes and elephants, potituras and phrase-offs. And then on the 10th day, somebody got up to play Mozart G major concerto, and they went yum bum ba-dum bum ba-da-da, and he said, "Stop, Moyes 24." But it was it sounds like it could have been really sort of tedious and boring, but it wasn't. It was, we learned so much about music through that book. It was absolutely stunning.
Those moments where you get a student. I've been teaching adults in Benslow online, and one student came up and played one of those melodies, and it was a sort of stop moment. I mean, it was so beautiful and so inspiring, and I genuinely think she thought she'd discovered it, because she was like, I don't think you'll know this, and played and it was like, but it was so beautiful, and she really owned it, and that's what's so lovely about those melodies as well.
Yeah, and that's a great starting book I mean, I know they get a little bit tricky, but I think, the flute's an easy instrument. If you've been playing a year, you can get started on those more
Absolutely.
and you learn about musical grammar. You learn about phrasing and articulation, and key all goes through all the keys. It's just a stunning book.
And again, Philippe Benol's idea about intervals, the expressive quality of some of the intervals. Yep. Beautiful,
absolutely. Do you remember which books you used before you got to college?
Before I got to Guildhall, it would have mostly been de la Sonorité. Yeah, I don't think we had that much variety, actually, Claire. I don't remember owning that many books as a child, but
exactly. I didn't either.
And it was very expensive, I seem to remember, as well. So it was one of those books that my parents would have said, well, I'm not buying that for you. But eventually they did. So I definitely used de la Sonorité, and then I would definitely have had the Bohème 24. And I love the Bohème 24 caprices. Again, anything that says 24, it's going to be good because it's going to take you through all the keys. But I really appreciate now, having, learned other keyed systems, I really appreciate that Bohème's helping us with this newly invented flute, because if you come off playing an 8-keyed flute and you go into playing a Bohème system flute and you play those 24 caprices, it sort of gets me back into Bohème flute playing, if you like, if I've just had a long period of not playing it, because he just, he's working every single finger combination, but at the same time, I think they're just beautiful pieces of music. So you never want to play any of them without a gorgeous tone. So you're going to stop and get your tone back if you can't find that lovely sound. But they're so challenging. They challenge absolutely, the number one with all those bottom Cs.
And fingering E with your little finger.
Even the little finger. Yeah.
Yes, terribly difficult. So, well, I remember I did play through Kohler studies, but I think I don't remember doing so many. I think I was mainly doing them because they were in some of the grade exams. I only did one grade exam. I only did grade 8 because I had a really good teacher that just said, let's learn the flute. So I remember Kohler, and then, yes, Bohème were fantastic. I also went through the Altez 26 studies.
Did you?
The original book, every study is a duet version, and they are absolutely stunning.
Is that still available?
I'm sure the volume must be available somewhere, but we need someone to publish the duet. The duet version, because if you were in a lesson and because they suddenly became quite lengthy. If your teacher was playing the second flute part, you'd keep going, and they really pushed you, in terms of stamina and learning all the various techniques. But they're beautiful. They're so melodic. They're so expressive.
I didn't know there was a duet version of those, and it's another thing I've spotted coming off teaching on Zoom and going back into the classroom. I've ended up playing so much with my students. I'm exhausted after 2 days at Wells. I'm absolutely on my knees, but it's so important. And I really spotted that that's what they were missing, having learnt on Zoom. I mean, Zoom's brilliant, but to play a duet with a student in the same room and bounce off each other's resonances, but also, that discipline of making sure that you're playing in time, intonation, really throwing dynamic contrasts at each other. That's the way in my book, that's the way to learn. And I remember when I learnt with Catherine Lucas in Guildhall, and I remember standing next door to her, and she would breathe. I mean, she'd breathe even if we didn't do duets, to be honest, but this enormous breath would come out, and it was just visually so inspiring to stand next door to somebody breathing properly. And you don't need then somebody to stand over you and tell you to breathe. You're just going to do it because you can hear the space and the time and the importance of that she used to do. It was a little skinny stick when I learnt with her. I used to dream of being able to just go and quadruple in size. It was brilliant.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head here, because when you're playing with your students, they learn so much. So you should seek out the Altes original method. The duets are stunning, absolutely stunning. Yeah. In terms of the Moyes books, which I love and I go back to so often, I think because they're so expensive for people listening, it's well worth looking on eBay. Because eBay, they have so much music, and you can often pick up the Moyes books for very, very little money. It's definitely worth looking. So tone development books, which are generally exercises, apart from the Moyes tone development, the Peter Lucas Graf singing flute, and the Robert Wynne book, which use melodies. And then we talked a bit with the Moyes 24 and the Boehm and the Altes. They are sort of standalone pieces of music that generally pick on one form of technique and then stick to it, don't they? So if it's for single tonguing, the whole study's on single tonguing. So other ones that I would use would be this is maybe for later on, things like the Damar's study books. Did you ever come across those? So yes. Damar's asked Marion what was difficult on the flute. Marion told him, and then he produced the 24 studies based on what Marion told him. And what I love about the Damar's, the first book, is there are no markings. There's no dynamic markings. So you have to create music for using your own imagination. Yeah, and the other one like that is the Karg Ellert, the 30 Caprices.
Yes. Gosh,
now, he also asked the principal flute of the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra what's difficult on the flute. And his book is very, very progressive. They're very short, but they get very difficult very quickly. So they're really challenging, but they're fabulous to play.
It's fun, isn't it? It is fun to have a real challenge. Because another one I love is the Castoret. Do you know the 12 studies that he's written?
12, yes, beautiful.
They're absolutely beautiful, and they really inspire because they're so beautiful. You know, there are again ones that you just want to do a better job each time you get to it.
Yeah.
You know, go further with your breathing, go further with the dynamics, try and bring those to life. They're wonderful, and they're short, so you haven't got 4 pages to do.
Yeah, and these books are progressive, so you feel like you've moved forward by the time you've finished. Did you ever play the Sussman? The Sussman?
No.
The most beautiful melodies in that one. Again, technically hard. They get technically hard, but wonderful for flexibility and patterns. Really lovely. So it's a very traditional book.
We haven't done Anderson, and Anderson is I always think the go-to after you've played all the Boehms. I don't know whether I'm right about that, but I always think it's sort of just that they're a little bit longer, very good for stamina. I remember, most of mine have got repeat marks at the bottom. That was cruel, but I used to try and play them all through twice, and because stamina becomes a big thing, doesn't it, eventually? I mean, again, we're talking about slightly more advanced, but if you're going to play 3 movements of a concerto, for example, you're going to need that sort of stamina that allows you just to keep going even when you get to the end of your sort of physical ability. And yes, I think that was probably another Catherine Lucas idea, that I would play those through twice.
I don't think nearly enough teachers talk about stamina. It's something that people really struggle with. But I think it's a bit like getting fit, that you gradually increase what you do to increase your stamina and flexibility. And again, another story that comes to mind suddenly when you say that is that when I did my final recital, there'd been the brass recitals the day before, and a trombone player had started off his recital, and after 20 minutes said, I'm sorry, I have to stop. I'm
exhausted. I can imagine that, actually, because of course, one thing that we forget is that if you've got a recital coming up, you're going to want to practice and then produce your best after all of that. It's not going to be possible unless you know that you can play for 6 hours and then play at your best. And it is, quite common, actually, I'm finding, is this 50-minute recital. Again, it may be a sort of post lockdown idea too, that you actually condense your programs and you do a 50-minute recital rather than a full-length recital with your interval. 50 minutes non-stop flute playing. You have to really think very hard about what you're going to program. If you're going to do Trochner Blumen, for example, which I stupidly did do a couple of years back. And I remember Tara being in the audience, and she said to me after she'd listened to the Trochner Blumen, which I placed right in the middle of the program, so stupid, she thought, she's never going to be able to play after that. And it's a very, 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 very good experience to go through, but preferably not in front of a massive audience in your final recital. It's not a good time to find out that actually maybe the placing of that piece isn't very sensible in the middle of the program.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It needs to be either at the end of your half or at the end of the program. The other one was the Christoph Zaraya. The 3 flamenco studies are stunning. And we haven't mentioned the Paganini caprices.
Yes, they are literal translations, aren't they, of the violin ones? And I love the idea of looking at other instruments. I mean, that's something we haven't touched on. It's something I keep meaning to do and forget, because anything oboe, almost any violin studies, they'll work really, really well on flutes. And of course, we've got the Bach cello suites, which I know you've arranged for flutes. I mean, there's some wonderful repertoire in other instruments, and we need to, grab some of their repertoire as well. Yeah. Not that we haven't got enough for flutes, but just that there's a different take. I mean, the Paganinis are so good because they're just wonderful compositions, and they're, again, very lively. They're very challenging. They've got the full range. They've got all the articulations. That's another one we haven't done, Claire, the books on articulations. Yes. Again, there's a fantastic, I've only just got it because I think it's only just out, actually. Philippe Benold's Pronunciation.
Don't know that one. Wow.
So that's a new, I believe it's new. So exercises for mastering the art of articulation for eloquent and expressive flute playings.
Wow.
We've just started looking at these at Wells. So he says, explore the many possibilities of expression through 2 series of major and minor scales, as well as several exercises and orchestral excerpts. And one thing I really love is he's got a little pull-out that's got all of the different articulations there. I mean, it's sort of stuff that we've seen before, but again, as I think we were saying earlier, it's just quite nice to have a different take on it. So he's also got some lovely ideas of methodical practice planning for scales. Always need a bit of planning. So he says, play with the metronome 4 scales, doubling the notes in double tonguing as fast as possible. And he's got little charts for trying to do all of this with different metronome speeds, and talking about how to relax the tongue, but also this idea that the tongue is a muscle. So if you do put it into training and you try doubling everything, then try tripling everything, then try quadrupling everything, you are building up that little bit of tone. And then at the back, he's got all this sort of orchestral excerpts that you would expect to have in here. We've got the Mendelssohn, we've got the Rossini, William Tell, we've got the Sounds from Carnival of the Animals. So again, all the usual suspects. But he's got lots and lots of instructions here to try and help us. So he's, for the sound song, for the Carnival of the Animals, he's got tip. Do not articulate too much. Now there's a good idea. Prioritize D-E-G-E instead of K-T to keep the flow of the air. I mean, they're just good ideas, just good things to try out.
Yep. I really like the fact that Philippe talks about if you go de-ge rather than to-ke, it'll lengthen and help the flow of the airstream, which a lot of people don't think. So you don't need to play short, you just need to play clear.
It's always about the air, really, and not the tongue, in my view. I mean, once you know that you are articulating well, It's then all about the air. So I've been looking at Sophie Duffertrell's book, It's called Rue Traverserie, the Flute Way. She's got 1, 2, and 3, and they are progressive. So I've just got number 3 here. I haven't got the earlier ones, just because of the sort of teaching that I'm doing. But it's got lovely ideas with these scales in duet form. Again, we've discussed how beneficial that is, but for example, I was recognizing that one of my students wasn't really articulating with a good sense of rhythm. So to have something, where you're articulating in alternate crotchets, so one's going taka taka and the next person's playing ta, and then you're putting it together in a duet, was wonderful. And then she's even got a 6-voice duet for doing articulation. So that's really lovely. If you're lucky enough to be teaching groups of students, she's got them all written out with bass notes as well for intonation, and just some nice ideas how to play rapidly. I mean, it is the advanced book. I'm quite sure that her book 1 and 2 are also well worth looking at. And it's, again, I think, nothing particularly new. We've got charts of different articulations and different groups. But I do think when we're looking at articulation and scales, there's a general sort of sigh of weariness from a lot of my students. Oh, scales again. And having, done all of your Tafnel and Gobert and learned all your Reichardt patterns, sometimes you just need a different way of looking at it, because you do still, benefit from playing your scale patterns. But sometimes it's nice to have a different look at how you can do them. And doing them in groups of 2 people, 3 people, 4 people is a fun way of looking at it, I must say.
I think that's fascinating. I think it sounds like a fantastic book. Yes, scales are the bane of people's lives, and yet there's very few repertoire pieces, that give us the scales that we generally practice when we're doing extended scales, starting on the tonic up to anywhere, top B, top C, top D, back to the bottom, back up to your tonic. But if we then, I think the best thing is to start people off on sequential patterns, which often are scales or arpeggio based or chromatic or whole tone or dominant or diminished. And sequential patterns also add that bit of musicality and shape and interest. And you can play through all your keys in one pattern and then change the pattern. So you've mentioned Tafnel and Gobert, that's a book of sequences. And you mentioned Reichardt, which are also sequences. Andre Makar.
Yep.
Absolutely fabulous. He was principal flute in, I think it was the Boston Philharmonic. Was it in the 1920s or the 30s?
Rings a bell, yeah.
Beautiful. Daniel S. Wood.
Don't know.
Studies for facilitating the upper register, although it starts lower down. So right. Daniel S. Wood, he's renowned for his wonderful Valse Caprice and this book of technical studies. And
brilliant.
It's really lovely. There's the Bowen 12 Studies, which is a book of sequences.
Yes, indeed.
And he picks patterns and he just follows the pattern through all the keys for each studies, goes through all your keys, which is brilliant. Geoffrey Gilbert has a very hard book called Sequences. We used to have that in the academy. We had set study books and set sequence books for each year. So for third year, it was the Geoffrey Gilbert sequences. And the second year was my sequentials. And the first year was the Reichardt. And it was, you learn so much. You feel the patterns, you learn patterns, which really helps also in sight reading, as much as tone production, as much as fingers and articulation. And sequences are adaptable for everything, aren't they?
They really are. And Claire, I didn't do them enough as a student, and I wish I had. I really do, because I think, I'm always going to be tripped up now. It's hard to reinforce them as you get older. And I would say to any of our youngsters out there, spend the time now, get them in your fingers, because you'll never forget them, and they'll be there then. And you get the confidence then. And it is about confidence at the end of the day. You want to feel confident when you go out and you play, and you get your confidence from knowing that those patterns are there and they're secure. And it's so worth that, because that would make me feel more comfortable if I'd known I'd done all of those. And I can't recommend more highly getting those patterns really under your fingers, so that you can shut your eyes and just play.
Yeah, they become the building blocks. I always talk about sort of pyramid learning, that in your practice you start with tone, technique, and articulation exercises, and then you put that into practice, into sequences, and then a little bit higher up that goes into studies, the traditional studies we've talked about, like Boehm and Anderson, and then right at the top of the pyramid is your repertoire. And the repertoire you can just go and play because you've worked all the other things.
I'm afraid it's probably unlikely that that's the way that most people practice, though, which is really sad, because that pyramid you've just described makes so much sense, doesn't it?
This is for the serious flute player. So, I mean, for those people, for our listeners who are just great amateurs, you have to work with the time you've got. But if you want to push your development, don't neglect the sequences and the studies. Now, we haven't talked about finger technique books. I'm wondering whether you've heard or seen the one by Moshe Epstein called Mind Your Fingers.
I have not. Sounds as if I should have.
Moshe Epstein is the most fabulous flute player. He studied a lot with Moyes, and he's lived and worked both in Israel and in Germany. He was professor in Hamburg and in Jerusalem, the Conservatoire. And this book came about after years and years and years. And he's based it on a scale that comes in the Paganini Caprices. I think it's number 6, which starts with it, which has a chromatic scale going to the top and coming back down. So it's a sequence book. He's got patterns. So he gives you a pattern on the first page, which is just a 2-bar figure on a scale, on a chromatic scale. And then the next 2 bars changes the rhythm. So he's got 2 bars of a little tiny bit of the chromatic scale in a rhythm. And then every 2 bars, he changes the rhythm. So it's nothing to do with articulation. It's all legato. And then the next page, he transposes it up a semitone. So you gradually work up doing all these variations of rhythms, which in itself is fascinating. And then you work your way down. And then the next half of the book is based on whole tone scales, which is the same thing, 2 bars with a rhythm, and then change the rhythm. And it's a really thick book, and there's no pictures. But I tell you what, he gave me a copy years ago, and I just played from it every day for a month. My technique zipped along. It was so much better, because we always talk about changing the rhythms and changing the articulations, but he took the thought process out for you. It's all in front of you. And it works stunningly. Absolutely fantastic book.
I think I will be running to find that, and I'm sure your listeners will too.
Where do we get it? By Zimmerman, and it's called Mind Your Fingers by Moshe Epstein.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Sounds fantastic.
It is. Who else have we got? There's, of course, Moyes has many technique book, finger technique books. There's the 480 exercises. I'm sure you're familiar with.
I'm just thinking when you were saying, taking something and doing 50, because isn't it? I'm just going to reach over because it's here. It is 50, isn't it?
50 variations on the Bach allemande. Yes.
On the allemande, which from a historical flute player's perspective, I probably shouldn't be recommending. And yet, it goes back to my sort of idea that if you're playing a piece, one of the best things you can do is defragment it, if you like, and put in your own study. And maybe that's where I'm sort of heading towards. If I say, my inspiration for being familiar with the whole concept of the study is that's what you end up doing to your own pieces, finding that bar and choosing 50 different ways of playing it. And this is a really, really good eye-opening starter, if you like, for finding the bar that you can't play and then putting it into 50 different variations. And I do love this book.
So that's called 50 Variations on the Bach Allemande from his solo sonata. I actually played about half that book to Moyes in a masterclass.
Brilliant.
Years ago. I didn't understand a lot of what he told me.
Right.
But he would say something in his broken English and then say, next one. And then we just sort of worked through, but it was the most terrifying thing and the most enlightening thing all at the same time. But I love that.
Unforgettable.
I love that book. Have we missed any other? The finger technique book. I mean, Moyes has got the 480, the technique and chromaticism, his daily exercise of the scale book. Jeffrey Gilbert's got a scale book.
We've got the Taffanel and Gobert, the method. That's got an awful lot in it, hasn't it? I mean, awesome pages of sequences again.
Fabulous. Taffanel and Gobert, the first lot of exercises. Are there 18, the first book of exercises? In the second volume.
Yeah, I think there's 18 and there's 18 to begin with, you're right. And then he goes into 24 etude progressive. Again, it's the idea of the progressive.
And they're hard.
And they're really hard. And then after all that, you get 12 grand etudes de virtuosité, just in case you needed some more. And then after that, I mean, what a book. What a book. You then get a whole thing on a part 7 style, advice for style, absolutely gold dust advice on how to phrase. I mean, it's, we are very spoiled, aren't we, really?
We are.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
I know. So we're giving out so many books. I don't think for our listeners, it doesn't really matter which books you pick because they will all help. I was just thinking now, there's some we haven't mentioned, sort of slightly more general for the tone technique and articulation. Peter Lucas Graf's Checkup book.
Yes.
Paul Edmund Davis.
Yeah.
The 28-day warm-up book or something. And Moyes, How I Stayed in Shape. I love that book.
I don't know that one. I don't know why.
How I Stayed in Shape.
Ah.
It's a collection of exercise and melodies. Now, he said that it was for assisting professional flute players with little practice time at their disposal, those who want to preserve their acquired skills and those who wish to acquire new ones.
Isn't that amazing? Yes, please.
Really good.
Well, that's another go-to. And then we've got Stephen Clark's The Flute Gym, which I don't have to my...
I don't have. I've read about it and it sounds fantastic. So Stephen Clark.
Fantastic. Yeah. And Joss Campbell, my dear friend Joss, has got study books for each grade. Yeah. And I keep reading fabulous reviews that you need all. I think she's got 9. I think she's got 8, the grades 1 to 8 plus a diploma level 1. So much work.
Great reviews, as you said. Joss Campbell, they're called warm-up books.
They're for each grade. Yeah, very, very sadly, I haven't got one to look at to tell you what's inside, but I do keep hearing fabulous reviews. And Stephen Clark's likewise, which is called The Flute Gym. So I think they're two that have sort of come out of lockdown. So probably well worth having a little dip into those. So
what we've talked about then, we've talked about tone books, finger technique books, and articulation, which are basically sort of sequence based. And then we've talked about traditional and contemporary study books where it's like a complete piece as a study going through various techniques. And we've mentioned a few general workbooks, method books. Now, do you remember what was your most challenging studies you ever played?
Well, do you know what? I would say the first in our project that we've just completed would be the challenge. I mean, they were interesting because I'd learnt them on an 8-keyed flute. And I've got a wonderful book. It's in German, unfortunately, and I've never had it translated. It's a big, thick book, and it has at the back, I mean, just 150 different fingerings for each note. And he's sort of all the symbols are there so that you can then look up the alternative fingerings. And if you're an 8-keyed flute player, this is your go-to book. But I was looking for another 24 studies that we could put in to do a second lockdown project, having done the 24 Boems in the first lockdown. And I've always loved the Fürstenau, but I've never played them on modern flute. So that was my challenge, because they're hard. They're really hard. And absolutely everybody who signed up to play one was writing to me going, wish I hadn't chosen that one because it's really hard. And I was going, yeah, but the last person just said that and the next person's just saying that. So they were really hard. They were a real challenge. They were a real challenge to perfect. And of course, so we've got 24 videos and they're all on YouTube. They're all on a playlist. If you go to my YouTube page, all the Boehm ones are there, and then all the Fürstenau ones, which we've just completed, are all there. And you get a little performance from a different musician, flute player, and then a little lesson afterwards. Just a sort of pointer of this is what I worked on, and this is what I found hard. And I think they're going to be a great resource, actually, Claire, because you get such a variety of emphases from a variety of players. We've got teachers at music college there, we've got students at music college there, we've got graduates, we've got postgraduates, we've got players from Canada, America, Australia, and they're sort of absolute generosity, huge generosity. They did this in lockdown, some on good quality with good microphones, some on a phone. And they did it all for charity, for Help Musicians. So absolutely none of us got any monetary remuneration. But I have to say, it was a brilliant challenge. And I think it was a really big help to a lot of professional players who were sitting in orchestras up to last year and then had nothing. So we've got quite a lot of orchestral players there joining us as well, who I think enjoyed the challenge. But it was a challenge. May I say it was a challenge? And
congratulations too, because it was a fantastic project and it is a great resource, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
I am not. No, we don't want another lockdown.
No, not a lockdown, but if you do a study project, I thought it was fantastic, and certainly with the lessons afterwards. I was just thinking about my most challenging studies, and I think they have to be the Lorenzo. There are two Lorenzo books. There's one, Caprices, and there's one called The 9 Gross, but that's gross as in big, not horrible. I think they're the hardest one. But the 18 Caprices, they're not as hard, but there's so much humour in the title. So he's got things like A Rough Task, A Dirge, Futuristic Dream, and A Bandy-Legged Capriccio. I mean, he's got such funny titles.
So there we go. That could be my new challenge. Maybe we should try and record all of these.
I think it would be great. Or
very hard.
Or the Cargellet. I think the Cargellet are great because you've got starting from quite easy to quite difficult, and they're very short. They remind me of the Moist 24 in that you've got something really short but focused on a particular technique. So Cargellet might be a good one.
Might be a very good one.
Goodness, I think we've covered quite a lot. And I think people listening will realise that we are great fans of study and technical books because they really help you develop your flute playing, even if you just do a little bit.
I've got a little tiny quote from Sophie, who writes in her Rue Traversierie, only independent fun and rigorous practice will guarantee the acquisition of a fluid technique. The end goal is also why these exercises call on your creativity. Use your imagination. Isn't that lovely?
Talking Flutes and Talking Flutes Extra are podcast productions by the Trevor James Flute Company. For more information, visit trevorjamesflutes.com.